In the first reading we have the account that has come through St. Paul of the institution, and that is linked with St. Luke because of the link between the two. The other written tradition that has come down to us is that of Matthew and Mark, very close. One or two things cause puzzlement for those who look at the texts. For instance, the way that the Lord says, "I shall not drink again of the fruit of the vine until I drink it anew with you in the kingdom of my Father." The people have asked, what does this mean after the consecration? Well, it simply means that it was inserted in the context of the Pesach, this meal that had already its rite, and that therefore this other chalice was part of that rite, and it wasn't actually the chalice of consecration. The third element of tradition is not written but oral, and it is the one that we have in the Roman canon. When talking to Protestants who know something about the Catholic Church, one has sometimes to face this question that we are using a formula which is not scriptural, and they want to know why. Well, the answer actually is pretty powerful. The experts think that because of the venerability of the Roman canon and its great antiquity, to which bear witness people like Abraham, Abel, and Melchizedek, right in the heart of the Eucharistic prayer, the gestuality looking up to heaven, the mention of the angel, the mention of hunc preclarum calicem, he took this most excellent chalice. Therefore, the same chalice the Lord used in the early celebrations, that it is actually in its essence apostolic, and therefore untouchable. And in tradition of this nature, we have something so august and awful that no one will touch it. It's come from so far back. Hence it is that one thinks that actually the wording that we have is that which has come down probably from that oral tradition, not written, where this unscriptural expression is coming in, novi et aeterni testamenti, of the new and eternal covenant. And when one is celebrating in the old rite, one does feel that continuity with the past centuries. Indeed, every time I use the low Mass with the last Gospel on my own, I think of that because of what is in my chapel where I celebrate the Tridentine Rite, the big altar I have, the image of our local martyr who was caught in his robes at that point. He was at the last Gospel in secret. Bang, bang, bang! Bang, bang, bang! Open up in the name of the King! And it was too late to get him into the hidey-hole, already prepared for this criminal. They banged down the door. A few days later, he was on this hurdle being carted through the streets of London, and you know what happened. Hanged, pulled down still alive, drawn and quartered. And the heart pulled out last of all by the hangman. "Behold, the heart of a traitor!" And they were all supposed to reply, "Long live the King!" Still beating. In his case, no one said a thing. Why? Because he'd helped them in the plague, and he was a good man. This was painted when I was in school, and it was going around for the big day of the 25th of October 1970. We in Cardiff had a mega celebration in the fields of Cardiff Castle, where Corpus Christi in all those years when I was young, used to be celebrated every year because it was a condition laid by the Marquis of Bute when he left to Cardiff. And this contains all the 40 martyrs that Paul VI canonized on that day. John Robert is there, Margaret Clitheroe is there. The women had special treatment. She was crushed to death. And they're all there. One or two have come afterwards. Oliver Plunkett, John Ogilvy. Oliver Plunkett actually was the last of the Great Army, 1681, I believe. Now, when in formation in France, in the Carthusian order, there was no distraction, no computer, no telephone, hardly any letters, about 4 a year when Mum wrote. No, actually, once she used to write once a month. I go back four times a year. And so, anything coming into the cell was very explosive with regard to the impact on the imagination. And one thing that out of the blue drifted into my cell was this. It was the diary, translated from the Latin, of Father John Gerard of the Society of Jesus, a part of the Jesuit underground. First of all, the long account, because it was a book essentially, went into how they got to England, all the alibis, all the aliases, all the ways they had to infiltrate in secret. Very ingenious. Dodging any dangerous contact. How they would celebrate in these houses of recusants, all well prepared by Brother Little John or Brother Nicholas, experts in making hidey holes. Some are still there, actually, around the country. And there the priest would hide in very uncomfortable positions for hours or even days. And they would celebrate when they came out. And often it was somebody in the assembly who would betray them. But then, what the authorities wanted was information if they caught one, especially a big fish, and they meant business. They couldn't put them to the question, as it was euphemistically called, without the Queen or the King's consent. And so a form was presented to them with the Queen's consent, indicating that she was allowing the necessary to happen for the good of the state. We have, in the family, as it were, bits of truth which have come down as regards what used to happen in the Tower of London. It would happen that they'd be thrown in a cell and they'd find traces of the previous prisoner. One of them was consoled by finding the traces of a very holy martyr. And in the cell was obviously some suggestion of a corner of prayer which this martyr had made. So with secret delight he would do the same and prepare himself in that tiny spot of the cell. Now, Father John Gerard has things we would never have known about in his diary. The great thirst that these martyrs had to celebrate the sacred mysteries. And yet, they were being tortured for doing so. Yet, Jesuits have always been Jesuits. And do you know that they found the means of celebrating the most forbidden thing in that country in secret in the Tower of London? Not once, but several times. And in those days, it meant getting all the bits. And they were smuggled through using things like orange juice to send secret messages. But also we have from his pen what the process was like of trying to extract information from somebody that they knew to have it. He goes into calm but eloquent detail about what it meant to the brain to be subjected to something beyond human power, when the pain got so atrocious that it couldn't take any more. And he mentioned at one point, it got to such a point that he just felt he had to give in. It was a fraction of a second, but then some strange force came out of somewhere and empowered his will against all human reckoning to say, no, I will not talk. And so they left him in the manacles. That meant that all the weight of the body was in the wrists. There were different means. One of the worst was the rack. Edmund Campion, one of the lights of Europe, brilliant man, testifies that at the third session on the rack, it was so atrocious that he really thought they wanted to execute him there and then. With Father John Gerard was captured one of the brothers who made these hidey-holes, and they didn't know that he was a brother. Eventually, the truth came out, and he was a very big fish for that reason, and he was one of the most severely tormented. He wasn't a priest, he was just an ordinary carpenter, but he was given strength from on high. Now, it was a shame for the state if one of these prisoners actually died in the torture chamber. He could see that that was going to happen to him, and so could they, because they were determined to get the information. So they applied some kind of iron to stop his back from completely breaking up, but it wasn't enough, and he died under torture. And immediately they tried to diffuse around the official system that he had died of suicide, but we know perfectly well. It was Brother Nicholas, I believe. I may have told you before that in Downside they have the persecution chalice, a tiny chalice. And when one is in a place like Downside with so many major relics of these saints, who went on the huge tree of Tyburn, which was made bigger to hold 8 at a time, so many with the executions, one feels this is holy. When one goes to the crypt of Tyburn, where all these huge relics are again, very close to the actual tree itself, which is actually in the middle of the traffic. There are bollards there, and there's this thing on the road indicating this was where the famous tree was. When one is there, one senses this is what the Mass meant, and how much the hatred of Satan was for it, because he was determined to extinguish its celebration and its light and warmth and healing from the country of England and all that would come from it. He was also keen on getting it stopped in Ireland. But the Irish were unbelievably strong. Massively, the common people would not give in. And so even without the Mass easily available, they would carry on. One day, after ordination, I came back to the English Benedictine church where I'd grown up. By then, most of the monks had gone on, either back to the abbey or to heaven. And I found in the safe the chalice of my spiritual father, who had sorted me out when I was in school, and as a holy man had been a huge influence. In a long succession of which he was very proud, Ampleforth is the direct linear héritier of all that went before. And I got hold of the chalice and celebrated my first Mass in Wales with it. And it was extremely moving. A few weeks later came another chalice to me from Father John Ryan, who had been my spiritual father after he died and got me back to Ireland, actually. And these chalices somehow put you in touch with something beyond yourself. Priests do not marry, and therefore every priest must come from a family. There is no natural succession, but the Lord gives each generation priests each time from a family. And in some way, the torch is passed on. Some months later, in Italy, I was sent down to the church in Montalcino, where there had been a miracle of the Madonna way back, one of these sanctuaries. And the priest, who by then was on his last legs, wanted me to preach. And I came down, and there was something in his eyes saying, "Well done, carry on." And he died. It's like that, my friends. We have something for one generation. We have it from the Lord, we have it also from human channels, and one has influence over another. And we can't see that Ireland is losing its most precious treasure.
The old familiar parish. This is the altar whereon many dreams did linger o'er long hours. 'Twas here that love was strong, when yet the morrow's coming beams did dawn on waiting dawn. For here did move the might that moved the world, and I recall that oft as morn soft shone, and eve did die, I'd hide and huddle well, and hear thee call, good master, hind this veil where thou didst lie. Yet I thought not that I one day would come again to memory's land, or here would stand to call thee gently back to this our home, made all of things well known, or that this hand would hold the chalice that my father held, here, even here, where ears and old tears wailed. O quam suavis est Domine, Spiritus tuus, qui ut cedinem tuam in filios demonstraris, pane suavissimo de cielo prestito, exurientes responnis, fastidiosos dimittens, dimittens in